Change is inevitable, growth is optional. Taki tytuł ma to pierwsze otwierające wystąpienie. Wystąpienie przygotowane przez Anię Jakubowski, liderkę i mentorkę, która się specjalizuje w sprzedaży strategii rozwoju biznesu. Ania Jakubowski. Wielkie brawa.
So the funny thing about change is that change itself is actually changing. There's sexy acronyms for it. We've heard of VUCA, volatile and unpredictable and complex, ambiguous. And we hear about the fact that change is the only thing that's inevitable. And there are major factors, two in particular, that are massively, massively changing the pace in which we experience it. One is globalization. I don't need to tell you much about the fact that the world borders are changing. But there's even examples of globalization that is different. Estonia, the first country in the world to set up the idea of e-residency. You don't need to live there, but you can be a resident of Estonia. Why did they do it? They're a population of 1.3 million. Who's going to come to Estonia? What do they have to offer? And so they decided that they were going to be ahead of the digital revolution. And wherever you lived in the world, you could have an e-residency. You could register your business in Estonia. And so 4 years ago, that journey started. Thousands of people from around the world, 179 different populations have already taken advantage of e-residency in Estonia. We know of the Bill Gateses, and we know of the Steve Jobs of the world. We know of the Elon Musks. Anybody know who Casper is? Casper is from Denmark. He is the first politically appointed technology ambassador in the world. Poland has ambassadors to the US, to Australia, to Canada, to France, to wherever. Casper is not representing a country, he's representing an industry for Denmark. He is coining and he is leading not diplomacy, but techplomacy. When we look at how Facebook has changed global citizenship and how countries today are struggling with what should the rules be. We look at what happened with Cambridge Analytica and the storms that created in terms of shaping political elections. So Denmark has said technology is that important to us that we're going to have an ambassador for that industry. And that ambassador for Denmark, Casper, lives now in Silicon Valley. So there are these great forces, globalization and technology. But there's also a major challenge. And that challenge is consumption. If the world continues to consume at the pace we are today, we would need 3.8 Earths to just simply maintain the consumption. And there's a big debate. Is consumption being driven by population? No. It's not the countries with the largest populations that are in fact sucking the resources from this earth. It's the richest nations. As wealth grows, that's what's putting our earth at risk. So this idea of change we need it simply to survive. But the challenge is we fear it. We're probably even somewhat fatigued by it. But in order to cope with change, you've got to look at how you feed your brain. Learning and knowledge, those are the recipes, those are the ingredients that allow you to store new memory. And when you store new memory, when you create new experiences, that opens you up to change. Now, before we go a little bit further into that, I want to play a little bit of an exercise here. We're all marketers, communicators. We know the value of branding. I want you to think about yourself. You as a brand. If you could choose one word to describe who you are, your equity, your essence, your anchor, what would your one word be? Brands do it all the time. Coca-Cola, it stands for happiness. Google, it's all about search. Pampers, it's all about development. Those are products and services, but they're more than that. They're essence, they're values. So I want you to think about that, and we're going to come back to that. If you could describe yourself in one word, what would your word be? Let's get back to the brain. So I said that in order for us to start down the path of change, we need to be able to feed ourselves with learning and knowledge. The challenge, though, is the brain, because the brain was, in essence, our core vehicle for survival, dating back to the hunter days, the brain takes in negative messages. They have a higher impact than positive messages. It takes 5 positive experiences to offset 1 negative experience. There's a neuroscientist, and he uses a great analogy. His name is Rick Hansen. And he says, negative experiences in the brain are like Velcro. They stick. Whereas positive experiences, they're like Teflon. They slide off. So when we think about how do we embrace new ideas, how do we look for opportunity, we have to remember that our brain is wired to resist. And we often look at change as the end result. When it's happened, when the bucket is full. But what we have to remember is that change happens with little steps. You don't run a marathon on day 1. You train for it day and day and day. You add a little bit more each time. You build your muscles. You build your endurance. And so that law of little things, that one step at a time, or in this case, one drop at a time, is how we need to think about the journey of change. And there actually is a model for it. There is a model that says we actually go through 5 stages to get to new levels of operating, new behaviors, new openness. It starts with that not ready yet phase, pre-contemplation, to the yeah, I'm getting ready. Yeah, I can kind of see the value in it, to the I'm ready to go, action, and then maintenance. One of the reasons New Year's resolutions don't work, one of the reasons diets often don't work, is because people jump into action. You've got to allow ourselves that time. When I first saw this model, it created great comfort for me, because I always thought of myself as the world's best procrastinator. Now I just realize I'm a great contemplator. It just takes me a long time to get going. So this idea of change, and how do we get ourselves ready for change? Let me share a little bit of my own experience. For 20 years, I worked for Procter & Gamble in various leadership positions. Each of us has at least one of their products in our homes. My business card was who I was. It was who I was to me as well. Then I left P&G and I worked for Coca-Cola for 6 years. Again, everybody knows Coke. There's only 2 countries in the world the brand isn't sold directly: North Korea and Cuba. And even in those countries, citizens know the brands. Once again, my identity was tied to the company. I was Ania from Coca-Cola. And then I wasn't. I left the corporate world, and for the first time in 26 years, I didn't have a title working for a big company, an executive on my that name on my business card. Who was I? Who was I to the rest of the world? Who was I to me? What happens to your identity when you no longer have that logo on your business card, that title that you can hang on to? I was having lunch with a friend, and he said, I told him I was leaving Coke at the time, and he said, ooh, Ania. He said, be careful. He said, 90% of people, they're not even gonna relate to you anymore. They're not even gonna, keep in touch with you anymore. To which I said to him, are you gonna be part of the 90 or the 10? And there was truth to what Robert had to say. You do drop off invites for conferences and for social gatherings. And your phone does ring a little bit less, with people just wanting to keep in touch just in case there's a business idea for them. Your identity starts to become rebranded. You start to be known as the former general manager of Coca-Cola. That's how you start to be introduced. That's how people start to know you. I was in an interview about a year ago, and I was talking with the interviewer, and he looked at my CV and he said, so I see that you left your previous role, the Coke role, a year ago. So what have you been doing with all this time? His question was absolutely wrapped in judgment. What he was really asking me is, why haven't you found work yet? We see the world through judgment. We use judgment as a way to protect ourselves. When we judge others, it builds our own self-confidence. When we cast judgment on others, it allows us to stay on the surface. It allows us to not dig deeper and really try to understand that person. Because if we understand them, oh my gosh, it may force us to have to think deeper about who we are. Rather than that interviewer asking me, so what did the last year give you? What did the last year give you? Instead, he chose to seek and find the weakness in me. Because what if he would have had to reflect on what the last year had given him? In his case, having worked for the same company for the last 35 years. It takes a lot when we think about what is it we do with our time. See, for me, that year that I didn't have a corporate job, what had I done? What was I doing? I was out exploring. I was out creating new experiences for myself, including entrepreneurship. Had the opportunity to start a venture, a very, very innovative venture in the medical sector with some leading surgeons, something where we are looking at and rethinking how healthcare will be looked at in the future. We're looking at quality and longevity of life. Wow, wouldn't have even thought of doing that years ago. What else have I done? I was mentoring young leaders, including tech startups. What did I know about tech startups? Very little. But what I could give them in my corporate experience and what they could give me in their tech understanding, boy, magical. And I spent the time taking care of myself, my own well-being. See, for me, those added up to accomplishments. But to him, they just sounded like excuses. It takes courage to change. It takes courage to change your career. One of my favorite stories is of Isabel. We call her Iz. Iz graduated from university with a psychology degree. She worked in a field completely unrelated to her degree. She worked for a technical software company. And over the course of 15 years, she became the manager of the technical writing department. Really valued by the owners of the company, valued by the employees. But she herself feeling completely unfulfilled. So she decided to quit. She took some time to reflect and explore. See, 20 years ago, Iz had this little dream, had this little aspiration to go to veterinary school. But she didn't have the grades to get in. And so she ended up with that psychology degree. Now, was it possible to maybe try again? But wait a second, she's in her 40s. She decided to give it a go. She went back to university for 2 years and redid the courses she needed to upgrade her marks to be able to apply. She got accepted into one of the 4 veterinary schools in Canada. And 4 years later, she graduated as a veterinarian. At the age of 47, Dr. Iz started her first practice working as a veterinarian. I love telling my sister's story because I just find it so inspirational. courage to continue to learn and grow, and therefore change. I often hear the statistic that 80% of us, we're not even fulfilled in what we're doing every day. We're not engaged, we're not inspired by where we work and the work we're doing. 80% of us in this room are not inspired and engaged in the work and where we're working. Is that possible? Millennials, they will have 4 different careers or 4 different jobs within the first decade that they graduate from school. X's, my generation, we had 2 jobs within that first decade of graduating. Generation Z, they will have up to 15 different roles, different jobs through the course of their careers, many of those in completely different sectors. So what will their identities be tied to? You see, identity and judgment, they're 2 sides of the same coin. We often look at our identity by what it is we do rather than who it is we are. And we judge each other. If you hear the title doctor, doctor is not a position, it's a judgment. When we think of somebody being a doctor, we think of them as being trustworthy and capable and completely within our abilities to see them as authorities. But we don't know if they became a doctor because they're passionate about what they're doing. Maybe they got forced by a parent. We don't know if they're good at being a doctor, but they have the title. We need to stop judging each other, judging ourselves by our identities, by what it is we do, and really dig deeper and get more self-aware of who it is we are and what is the impact that we're having, so that we can experience change and embrace it as we go through. Because it's not about what we do, it's about who we are that's going to allow us to continue to grow. The analogy I use often is I call it going on safari. See, when you go on safari, you have to put yourself in a different environment, in a different perspective, and it's no longer your rules by which you play by. When I went on my first safari, I was amazed at how the drivers could see lions a kilometer away. And I'd be like, wow, how many carrots do you have to eat to be able to see those lions that far away? By the time I went on my second and third safari, I realized that what the drivers were doing, they weren't just looking for the lions, but they were reading the environment. They were looking to see where the birds were flying, because when there's birds flying, 2 things are true. There's either a kill nearby, or the birds are giving signals to the other animals that there's cats in the area. So when you go on safari, you put yourself in an environment, you give yourself perspective from a point of view other than your own that will drive your learning and your knowledge. We have to go on this journey of learning and knowledge. Failure and error, we need to embrace those, because those allow us just to recalibrate. They strengthen our perspective. Experiment and interpreting, those help us change our mindset, bring on new meaning in how we look at things. I want to go back to that one word I asked you to think about yourselves. Do you have your one word in your mind? Let me share mine. My one word is impact. It's a word I've loved for decades, It's my favorite word in the English language. It makes me smile, makes me feel great every time I think about it. The ability to have an impact. What were some of your words? Anyone willing to share a word? Come on. Shout out. Okay, on the count of 3, everybody say their word, and that way you don't have to be worried about being, singled out. So on the count of 3, I want you to say your word out loud. 1, 2, 3. Impact. Come on, guys. I'm going to do this one more time. 1, 2, 3. Change is inevitable. I would argue that absolutely growth is not optional. I encourage you to enjoy the rest of this day and think about your journey to change. Thank you.